It wasn't the cascade of diamonds at her throat that silenced the room, nor the designer gown that clung to her like a second skin. It was the look in her eyes. Standing on the precipice of public humiliation, Rebecca Hamilton watched her billionaire husband, Mason, guide his young mistress across the ballroom floor. Anyone else might have shattered. But Rebecca wasn't just a wife. She was an architect. And as he spun another woman in the spotlight he'd stolen from her, she made a decision. She wouldn't just expose their affair. She would detonate the very foundation of his empire. This wasn't a story of heartbreak. It was the story of a queen taking back her kingdom, armed with nothing but a microphone and a truth more devastating than any affair. The grand ballroom of the Atoria Hotel was suffocating in its own opulence. A galaxy of crystal chandeliers rained down cold, fractured light upon New York's elite. The air was thick with competing scents of expensive perfume and the faint metallic tang of ambition. This was the annual Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, an event Mason Hamilton, founder and CEO of Hamilton Innovations, chaired with the proprietary air of a man who didn't just attend charity events, but owned the very concept of charity itself. From her seat at the head table, Rebecca Hamilton watched him work the room. To the uninitiated, Mason was a titan of modern industry, a charismatic visionary who had revolutionized data security. His smile, a dazzling flash of white, was his primary weapon. It disarmed senators, charmed investors, and for a time had convinced Rebecca that the man she'd married was the same man the world adored. Now she saw the mechanics behind it, the slight upward tilt of the chin for condescension, the crinkle at the eyes for feigned sincerity, the way it never, ever truly reached his own. She smoothed a non-existent crease in the shimmering gunmetal gray silk of her gown. Her dress was a statement, elegant, severe, and impenetrable. It was a suit of armor for a battle she hadn't known she was fighting until it was almost too late. For the past year, the distance between them had grown from a crack to a chasm. It started with late nights at the office, hushed phone calls he'd walk into another room to take, and a new, almost manic obsession with his public image. He had always been vain, but this was different. It was defensive. Rebecca had been more than a silent partner in his ascent. In the early days, in their cramped Palo Alto apartment, it was her code that formed the bedrock of Hamilton Innovations' first patent. It was her quiet, meticulous business plan that had secured their first round of funding when Mason's blustering charm had failed. She was the architect. He was the gilded facade. But as the billions rolled in, her name had been gently, systematically erased from the company's history, relegated to the role of supportive wife. He had rewritten their shared story, and she lost in the whirlwind of their success, and the birth of their son had allowed it to happen. "He's in his element, isn't he?" a voice purred beside her. It was Beatrice Vance, a formidable woman whose husband ran a rival hedge fund. Her eyes, however, weren't on Mason. They were fixed on a younger woman holding court near the silent auction table. "That's your husband's new senior analyst, isn't it, Olivia Reeves?" "No relation." "Thank God." Rebecca's gaze followed. Olivia Reeves. Of course, she was everything Rebecca was not: effervescent, overtly ambitious, with a hungry look she mistook for passion. She wore a crimson dress that was a slash of defiance in the sea of muted, tasteful colors. Rebecca had seen her before in passing at company events, a bright young thing from Wharton whom Mason had personally mentored, fast-tracking her to a position of influence that made no logistical sense. Rebecca had ignored the signs, bearing her suspicions under the weight of a 20-year marriage and the hope that she was simply being paranoid. But the whispers had become too loud, the evidence too stark, the private credit card statements she wasn't supposed to see detailing trips to St. Bart's that coincided with Olivia's Instagram posts, the lingering scent of a floral perfume, jasmine, and something sharp in Mason's car. "She certainly made an impression," Rebecca replied, her voice a placid lake over a churning abyss. "She's made something, dear," Beatrice muttered, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. Mason was laughing now, a deep, booming sound that commanded attention. He had his hand on the small of Olivia's back. It was a gesture of ownership, casual and confident, performed for an audience he believed was too dazzled by his brilliance to see the betrayal. But Rebecca saw it, and in that moment, she felt the last vestiges of her denial crumble into dust. The pain was a physical thing, a shard of ice in her chest. But beneath the pain, something else was crystallizing, a cold, hard resolve. She had tolerated the sidelining, the erasure of her contributions, the slow, painful death of their partnership. She had convinced herself it was the price of the life they had built, the price of stability for their son, Tyler, who was safely away at boarding school, shielded from this toxic charade. But this public spectacle of humiliation was a line he had not just crossed, but danced upon. Mason finally returned to the table, his face flushed with adoration, not for her, but from the sycophants he'd just left. "Rebecca, darling, you're looking tense. Have a drink. Enjoy the evening we've put together." He gestured expansively, as if he had personally hung the chandeliers. "I am enjoying it, Mason," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "I'm finding it all very illuminating." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He searched her face, looking for the familiar acquiescence, the gentle deference he had come to expect. He found none. He saw only a stranger, a woman with eyes like polished steel. "Good," he said, turning away, already scanning the crowd for his next admirer. "The auction for the pediatric wing is about to begin. My speech is after. I'll expect you to be smiling." It wasn't a request. It was an order. One last order she would pretend to obey. As the lights dimmed and the auctioneer took the stage, Rebecca discreetly slid her hand into her evening bag. She didn't touch the spare lipstick or the compact mirror. Her fingers closed around a small, sleek USB drive. It contained a different kind of truth. Not just the truth of his infidelity, but the truth of his success. The truth of a project codenamed Chimera. She had stumbled upon it by accident, looking for an old tax document on their home server. A mislabeled folder, a password that was with grim irony her own birthday. It was a labyrinth of deception. Shell corporations, falsified data reports submitted to investors, backdoors built into the security software they sold to Fortune 500 companies, software she had helped design. He had taken her brilliant, protective code and twisted it into a skeleton key, selling security on one hand, while creating vulnerabilities he could exploit on the other. And the architect of this fraudulent data scheme, the one who managed the flow of information and cooked the books, the project lead was listed as O. Reeves. Olivia. It all clicked into place. The affair wasn't just a sordid dalliance. It was a business partnership. Olivia wasn't just a mistress. She was an accomplice. Mason hadn't just betrayed his marriage. He had betrayed every client, every investor, and the very principles upon which their empire was supposedly built. The auctioneer's voice droned on, listing off seven-figure bids for luxury vacations and priceless art. Rebecca felt strangely detached, as if she were watching a film of her own life. She saw the path ahead with terrifying clarity. She could remain silent, keep her gilded cage, and let the poison spread, or she could burn it all to the ground. Mason patted her hand, a perfunctory, possessive gesture. "Get ready to be proud of me, darling." "Oh, Mason," she said, looking him directly in the eye, a faint, chilling smile touching her lips. "I have no doubt that tonight will be a night you'll never forget." The final bid for a week on Richard Branson's private island closed at a staggering $2 million, drawing a wave of performative applause. The auctioneer, a man with a voice as smooth as aged whiskey, beamed at the crowd. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce the man whose vision and generosity make nights like this possible, the chairman of the Starlight Children's Foundation, the titan of technology. Please welcome Mr. Mason Hamilton." A spotlight found Mason as he rose from his chair. He buttoned his tuxedo jacket, basking in the adulation. He gave Rebecca's shoulder a final proprietary squeeze. "Here we go," he whispered, his breath smelling of champagne and self-satisfaction. He strode toward the stage, his gait filled with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed he was the master of his own universe. Rebecca watched him go, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. This was the moment, the point of no return. Mason's speech was exactly what she expected, a masterful tapestry of feigned humility and carefully crafted sound bites. He spoke of hope, of legacy, of the profound responsibility that came with great wealth. He painted a picture of himself as a benevolent king, bestowing his blessings upon the less fortunate. The crowd was captivated, hanging on every word. "We are not just building a company," he declared, his voice resonating with rehearsed passion. "We are building a better future, a more secure future for our children." Rebecca almost laughed at the irony. A secure future built on a foundation of lies. Then came the part she knew was coming, the part that was for an audience of one Olivia. And of course, none of this is possible without inspiration. Mason continued, letting his gaze drift from the teleprompter. He scanned the crowd and, with the subtlety of a freight train, his eyes landed on the slash of crimson in the third row. He smiled a private, intimate smile that was horrifyingly public. "To the fire that fuels the engine, to the spark of brilliance that challenges us to be better." The room was silent, but 1,000 unspoken messages crackled in the air. People shifted in their seats. Glances were exchanged. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Rebecca felt the stares of 100 people, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was no longer Rebecca Hamilton, a woman of substance and intellect. She was the wife, a tragic figure in a drama not of her own making. The humiliation was a physical force pressing down on her, trying to crush her. She could feel her composure threatening to crack. The sting of tears pricked at the back of her eyes. She could flee. She could run to the powder room and collapse in a heap of gray silk and shattered dignity. That was what everyone expected. That was what he expected. But as she looked at Mason preening on stage, and at Olivia, who was now looking down with a demure yet triumphant smile, the grief inside her flash froze into something harder, something more potent: rage, a pure, clarifying rage that burned away the pain and left only purpose. He was not just disrespecting her. He was using this stage, this noble cause, as a backdrop for his sordid little power play. He was desecrating the memory of the company they had built together, the dreams they had once shared. Mason finished his speech to thunderous applause and a standing ovation. As the lights came up slightly, a live orchestra began to play a soft, romantic ballad. It was the signal for the ceremonial first dance. Traditionally, the chairman and his wife would take the floor. Mason descended the stage. His face aglow, he walked right past Rebecca. The room held his collective breath. With a confidence that was breathtaking in its audacity, he extended his hand not to his wife of 20 years, but to the woman in the crimson dress, to Olivia Reeves. Olivia looked momentarily surprised, a flicker of what might have been genuine shock or expertly feigned modesty. She glanced at Rebecca, a silent, insolent question in her eyes. Then she placed her hand in Mason's. The gasps were audible now, sharp intakes of breath rippling through the ballroom. Beatrice Vance, sitting beside Rebecca, reached out and placed a hand on her arm. "That man," she hissed, "has no soul." Rebecca didn't flinch. She watched them walk to the center of the vast, polished dance floor. The orchestra, after a moment of confused hesitation, swelled into the melody of a classic waltz. Mason placed one hand on Olivia's waist, the other engulfing her hand, and began to move. They were a striking couple, his commanding presence, her youthful fire. They moved with a practiced ease that spoke of hours spent together away from prying eyes. Now they were broadcasting their intimacy, turning the dance floor into their own private island, inviting 1,000 people to witness Rebecca's ultimate disgrace. Every turn, every dip, every shared smile was a fresh cut. He was erasing her, publicly replacing her, declaring her obsolete. The pitying stares intensified, but Rebecca no longer felt them. She was insulated by her newfound purpose. She was no longer watching a betrayal. She was watching a target position himself perfectly in her sights. She rose from her chair. Her movement was so deliberate, so calm that it commanded more attention than a hysterical outburst ever could. Beatrice's hand fell away. A hush began to spread from their table outwards as people noticed the scorned wife was now on her feet. She did not look at the dancing couple. Her eyes were fixed on the stage, which the MC was now approaching to thank Mason for his speech. Rebecca's path was clear. With a straight back and a steady, measured pace, she began to walk. She walked past tables of stunned onlookers, her gunmetal gray dress a whisper of steel moving through the gilded chaos. Mason, lost in his triumph and Olivia's adoring gaze, hadn't noticed. He spun his mistress in a final, dramatic flourish as the song came to its end, her red dress flaring around them like a flame. By the time he looked up, basking in the awkward, scattered applause, it was too late. Rebecca had already reached the side of the stage. The MC, a local news anchor named Michael Shaw, saw her approaching, his professional smile faltering into confusion. "Mrs. Hamilton," he asked, his voice low, "is everything all right?" Rebecca didn't answer him. Her eyes were locked on the lectern in the center of the stage. The microphone was still live. She ascended the 3 short steps. The spotlight, which had been fading, suddenly found her. The room fell into a deep, profound silence. On the dance floor, Mason froze. The smug, triumphant look on his face evaporated, replaced by dawning horror. He saw his wife standing on his stage, in his spotlight, and for the first time that evening, Mason Hamilton looked afraid. Rebecca stepped up to the lectern, her gloved hands gripping its sides. She leaned toward the microphone, her heart hammering against her ribs, a wild, terrifying drumbeat of liberation. She took a breath and looked out not at the crowd, but directly at her husband. The silence in the Atoria Grand Ballroom was a living entity. It was absolute, heavier than the crystal chandeliers, deeper than the pockets of the men and women who now stared, utterly transfixed, at the woman on the stage. The orchestra had trailed off into a confused discordance before falling quiet. Wait, staff froze mid-stride. Trays of champagne glasses held aloft like offerings to a new, unpredictable deity. Rebecca Hamilton stood in the lone spotlight, a figure carved from ice and will. She didn't weep. She didn't scream. Her poise was more unsettling than any display of hysteria could ever be. Her gaze remained locked on Mason, who was still standing in the middle of the dance floor, Olivia a scarlet shadow at his side. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, the ghost of a woman he thought he had successfully buried. "Good evening," Rebecca said. Her voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, was crisp and clear. It cut through the silence like a scalpel. There was no tremor, no hint of tears. It was the voice she used in boardrooms, the voice of calm, irrefutable authority he hadn't heard in years. "I apologize for the interruption." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air, dripping with an irony so thick it was almost tangible. "But my husband, in his wonderful speech, spoke of inspiration, of legacy, and it moved me. It moved me to share a more complete version of the story." A nervous murmur rippled through the audience. This was no longer just a marital spat. It was becoming a public execution. Marcus Thorne, a veteran reporter for the New York Times who was seated near the front, had already discreetly activated the voice recorder on his phone. Rebecca's eyes scanned the room, acknowledging the powerful faces staring back at her. "Many of you in this room are investors in Hamilton Innovations. You are partners. You have entrusted my husband with your capital, your confidence, and your own corporate security. You believe in the story of a brilliant man who built an impregnable fortress to protect the world's data." She let her gaze drift back to Mason. "It is a wonderful story, and like all the best stories, it is a magnificent fiction." A collective gasp went through the room. Mason took a step forward, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Rebecca, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Get off that stage." His voice was a harsh whisper, but in the unnerving quiet it carried, Rebecca ignored him, her focus absolute. Mason is right about one thing. He didn't do it alone. In the beginning, we were partners. While he was the face, the voice, the dazzling salesman, I was the architect. I wrote the foundational code for our Sentinel security suite, my algorithm, my design. A design based on a simple, sacred principle, inviolability. She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the audience in. A fortress has walls to keep people out, but the most effective fortress, the most profitable one, has a secret door that only the king can open. For years, I believed we were building walls. I was wrong. My husband and his protege have been building doors. The spotlight felt hot on her skin, but inside she was ice cold. She saw Olivia's face now, the color draining from it, the triumphant smirk replaced by dawning, panicked comprehension. I believe the board members from Sterling Cooper Capital are here tonight, Rebecca asked, her tone deceptively pleasant. She scanned the front tables. A few men in bespoke suits shifted uncomfortably, and the representatives from the Vidian Group, your companies, along with 24 other Fortune 500 firms, are flagship clients of our Sentinel-class security. She didn't need to wait for a reply. I'm sure you'll be fascinated to learn, then, about Project Chimera. The name landed like a stone in a still pond. There was no recognition from the audience, but on the dance floor, Mason flinched as if he'd been struck. Olivia took an involuntary step back, her eyes wide with terror. Project Chimera, Rebecca continued, her voice resonating with cold, hard clarity, is the unofficial, highly confidential, and wildly illegal R&D initiative at the heart of Hamilton Innovation's recent profit boom. It's a simple, elegant piece of fraud. While we sell you impenetrable security, Project Chimera actively develops and maintains a series of master backdoors in that very software. We sell the lock, and we sell the skeleton key. The room erupted. The low murmur exploded into a roar of shock and outrage. The scene devolved into chaos. Phones were not just out, they were held high, recording. Marcus Thorne was already on his feet, moving toward the stage. Mason finally broke from his paralysis. Lies. She's hysterical. Security, he bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. He started moving toward the stage, pushing through the throng of onlookers. My wife is unwell. She's having a breakdown. Am I? Rebecca's voice sliced through the din, regaining control. She held up her left hand, and in it, the small USB drive she had taken from her purse. It glinted under the spotlight. This is not hysteria. This is data. This is a complete internal audit of Project Chimera. Code names, timelines, encrypted communications. It contains the schematics of the backdoors, a list of every client who has been compromised, and most importantly, the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands where the profits from this special access have been diverted. She looked directly at Olivia, whose face was now a ghastly shade of white against her crimson dress. It also includes every single progress report and financial transfer authorized by the project's lead analyst, a very bright, very ambitious young woman named Olivia Reeves. The match had been struck. The inferno was about to begin. The revelation of Olivia's name was the spark that ignited the powder keg. The chaos in the ballroom instantly stratified. The merely curious backed away, creating a ring of horrified spectators. The personally invested, the board members, the investors, the high-powered clients surged forward, their faces contorted with rage and disbelief. Shouts of, "What is she talking about, and is this true?" echoed off the frescoed ceiling. Olivia Reeves looked as though the floor had vanished from beneath her feet. Her carefully constructed world of ambition, seduction, and power had been vaporized in a single, perfectly enunciated sentence. She looked from Rebecca's cold, implacable face on the stage to Mason's approaching storm of fury, and her composure shattered. She was no longer a brilliant analyst or a coveted mistress. She was a cornered animal. "He made me," she stammered, the words barely audible, directed at no one and everyone. "He told me it was a contingency, a security stress test." Mason finally reached the foot of the stage, his handsome face purple with rage. Two burly security guards in ill-fitting tuxedos were close behind him. "Shut her up," he roared at them, pointing a trembling finger at his wife. "Get that microphone away from her now." But the guards hesitated, caught between the fury of their billionaire benefactor and the surreal, high-stakes drama unfolding before them. They were security for a charity gala, prepared for drunkards and gatecrashers, not for the live broadcast implosion of a corporate empire. Rebecca held her ground, the USB drive held up like a talisman. "Ask him about the Axiom Holdings account number 7345B at the Grand Cayman National Bank." She projected her voice, overriding the rising tide of noise. "An account opened 6 months ago. An account that received 3 separate 7-figure wire transfers from a shell corporation based in Panama. A shell corporation whose sole purpose is to sell proprietary client data, your data, to the highest bidder on the dark web." A man in the front, a portly executive Rebecca recognized as Robert Mayfield, CEO of a major logistics firm, turned on Mason. "My God, Mason, we just signed a 9-figure security contract with you last month. Is what she's saying true? It's slander. It's corporate espionage," Mason yelled, finally scrambling up the side of the stage himself, his elegant tuxedo now disheveled. He lunged for the lectern, for the microphone, for his wife. Rebecca stepped back calmly, pulling the microphone from its stand with a practiced movement. She never took her eyes off him. "He will tell you I'm vindictive. He will tell you I'm a scorned woman seeking revenge for his infidelity." She gestured with her free hand toward the dance floor where Olivia stood, weeping openly now. "And he is not wrong. I am a scorned woman. He made sure of that tonight. But my hurt is irrelevant. This," she held up the USB drive again, "is not about my marriage. It's about his fraud." The security guards, spurred into action by Mason's physical presence on the stage, finally moved toward her. But it was too late. The damage was done. Every phone in the room was a weapon aimed at Mason Hamilton. Marcus Thorne of the Times was already dictating furiously to his editor. "That's PROJECTCHIMERA. Yes, it's the wife on stage. Get a team ready." Mason reached Rebecca, his hand grabbing her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. "You're destroying us," he hissed, his charismatic mask completely gone, revealing the snarling, desperate man beneath. "You're destroying everything." "No, Mason," Rebecca said, her voice dropping to a near whisper meant only for him, though the microphone still carried it to the silent, watching room. "You destroyed us. You destroyed it all the moment you decided your genius was a license to steal. I'm just turning on the lights." She wrenched her arm from his grasp with a strength that surprised them both. At that moment, the hotel security, finally realizing the situation was far beyond the capabilities of the event staff, arrived in force. They were professional, organized, and moved with purpose, creating a cordon around the stage. Mason, seeing the new uniforms, seeing the professional calm in their eyes, seemed to shrink. The fight went out of him, replaced by the cold, stark terror of a man who had just lost complete control. He looked out at the sea of faces, former friends, former allies, former admirers, and saw only condemnation. He saw his legacy turning to ash. Down on the floor, the scene was one of utter pandemonium. Olivia Reeves, seeing the professional security and hearing the shouts for the SEC and federal investigators, made a desperate move. She turned and fled, pushing past stunned guests, her crimson dress a blur. She ran for the exit, sobbing a high-pitched, panicked sound. She didn't get far. 2 of the hotel security men intercepted her before she could reach the lobby, holding her gently but firmly by the arms. Her flight was an admission of guilt, more damning than any document. On stage, Rebecca stood poised and still amidst the wreckage she had wrought. She looked at the man she had loved, the man with whom she had built a life and an empire, and felt a profound, aching emptiness. There was no triumph, no joy, only the grim satisfaction of a necessary, painful amputation. She walked calmly over to the edge of the stage toward Marcus Thorne, who was now being held back by a security guard. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice steady. The reporter's eyes were wide with professional glee and genuine shock. "Mrs. Hamilton." She held out the USB drive. "I believe this belongs in the hands of someone who will know what to do with it. I have already sent a password-protected copy to the Enforcement Division of the SEC and to my attorney. The password will be released in 1 hour. This is your head start." Thorne's hand shot out, taking the small piece of plastic and metal as if it were the Holy Grail. "Mrs. Hamilton, why?" he asked, the journalist in him unable to resist the question. Rebecca looked back at Mason, who was now being quietly but firmly escorted off the other side of the stage, his face slack with shock. "Because," she said, the microphone catching her final, devastating words before a guard finally cut the power. "Some of us still believe that a fortress should protect the people inside, not just the king on his throne." The spotlight died. The ballroom was plunged into a babble of frantic conversation in the harsh, functional light of the hotel's main fixtures. The party was over. The inferno had just begun. The Architect's Revenge. Rebecca Hamilton's story. The hours that followed were a blur of structured chaos. The Starlight Children's Foundation Gala did not so much end as it was quarantined, becoming the epicenter of a story that was already exploding across the globe. The Atoria Hotel, in cooperation with the NYPD, who had arrived with quiet, grim efficiency, locked the ballroom down. No one was allowed to leave without giving a preliminary statement. Rebecca was escorted not to a police car, but to a private suite on one of the upper floors. Her attorney, Benjamin Carter, having been summoned and arriving with the speed of a man who knew his billing hour for this night would become legendary. He was a small, precise man with eyes that missed nothing. He found Rebecca standing by the vast window, looking down at the river of red and blue lights flashing silently on the street below. Her armor, the gunmetal gray dress, now felt impossibly heavy. "The SEC has already been in touch," Ben said, his voice calm and grounding. "They received your package. They have the password. An emergency injunction is being filed to freeze all Hamilton Innovations assets, personal and corporate. Mason and Miss Reeves are being held for questioning in separate locations. It's moving fast." "Rebecca, faster than I've ever seen." "Good," she said, her voice distant. She hadn't asked about her son, Tyler. He was safe at his school, hundreds of miles away. But she knew this tidal wave would reach him eventually. The thought was a fresh stab of pain, a cost she had calculated but still dreaded paying. Marcus Thorne's initial online report broke the internet an hour ago. Ben continued, looking at his phone. "The Hamilton Papers. He's calling it. The stock is already in free fall in after-hours trading. It will be worthless by morning. You didn't just expose a fraud. Rebecca, you decapitated a multinational corporation." She turned from the window. "It was a cancer. I removed it and the patient is dead. Thousands of employees, pension funds, an entire ecosystem." Ben countered softly. "We'll be better off once the rot is gone," she finished, her voice hardening again. "Those employees were working for a criminal enterprise. Their pensions were invested in a lie. The truth is always brutal. Ben, that doesn't make it wrong." He saw the unshakable conviction in her eyes and nodded slowly. "The district attorney's office will want to offer you immunity in exchange for your full testimony." "I don't need immunity," she replied. "I haven't broken any laws." "Rebecca," he said, his tone sharpening with professional concern, "you were on the board. You were a co-founder. They will argue your silence was complicity." This was the part she had prepared for, the move in the chess game she knew was coming. "I have my own documentation, my logs, My own internal audits from the moment I suspected something was wrong. Voicemails I saved. Emails I flagged. I have a clear, documented timeline of my own discovery, my internal objections to Mason, which were dismissed, and my decision to act once I had irrefutable proof. I am not an accomplice. I am the key witness. Ben stared at her, a slow smile of pure admiration spreading across his face. You magnificent woman, you didn't just bring a bomb to the party. You built the fallout shelter first. For the first time that night, a flicker of something other than ice and pain touched Rebecca's lips. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. A good architect always plans for demolition. Downstairs, the gilded cage had become an interrogation room. Mason Hamilton, stripped of his charm and his power, sat in a hotel conference room that now served as a makeshift command post. His bravado had evaporated, replaced by a sullen, petulant silence. He demanded his own lawyer, refusing to answer any questions. He kept looking at the door as if expecting someone to walk in and tell him this was all a terrible misunderstanding. No one came. In another room, Olivia Reeves had crumbled completely. Her confession, interspersed with hysterical sobs, tumbled out. She painted herself as a victim, a brilliant young woman seduced and manipulated by a powerful man. She claimed she thought Project Chimera was a theoretical exercise, that she didn't understand the true implications until it was too late. But the digital trail Rebecca had provided was absolute. Olivia's digital signature was on every fraudulent report, every illegal transfer. She was not a pawn. She was the project manager. Her desperation was not that of an innocent, but of a co-conspirator who had been outplayed. As the sun began to rise over the city, casting long gray shadows across the deserted ballroom, Rebecca knew her old life was over. The homes, the jets, the status, all of it was gone, incinerated in the fire she had started. The name Hamilton, once a symbol of innovation and success, would now be synonymous with disgrace. Ben finally closed his briefcase. They're ready for you to give your formal statement. After that, I'm taking you to a secure location. The press is already camped outside your townhouse. It's going to be a storm. Rebecca nodded. She felt strangely calm. The weight of her secret, of her husband's betrayal, had been lifted. In its place was a vast, uncertain future. She had lost her past and torched her present, but for the first time in a very long time, she felt free. As they walked toward the door, Ben paused. Are you ready for this? Rebecca looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the hotel window. The exhausted woman in the impossibly expensive dress looked back at her. The queen was in ruins. Her castle was gone, but she was still the queen. I've been ready for a long time, she said. Let's begin. She had walked into the gala as a billionaire's wife. She was walking out as the architect of his downfall, the guardian of a truth he had tried to bury, and the master of her own uncertain fate. The dance was over, but her new life was just beginning. The news cycle was merciless. By mid-morning, Hamilton Innovation's collapse was trending worldwide. Every major financial channel had assembled panels of experts to dissect the implosion of what had, 12 hours earlier, been the gold standard of cybersecurity. The stock, which had closed the previous day at 287 per dollar share, was now trading at pennies. Trading had been halted 3 times before the market simply gave up trying to staunch the bleeding. The employees of Hamilton Innovations arrived at their sleek headquarters to find FBI agents at the doors. The building was sealed, declared a crime scene. Thousands of workers stood in shocked clusters on the plaza. Their carefully curated careers suddenly turned to vapor. Mid-level executives who had been boarding red-eye flights to satellite offices were intercepted at airports. The company credit cards in their wallets had already been deactivated. In a conference room on the 87th floor of an anonymous glass tower, 30 blocks from the chaos, Rebecca sat with Ben Carter and a team of 6 federal prosecutors. The table was littered with coffee cups and half-eaten sandwiches. They had been there for 4 hours, and they were still just scratching the surface. Let me get this straight, said the lead prosecutor, a stern woman named Patricia Winters. You're saying that the back doors weren't just for industrial espionage. They were selling access to foreign entities. Rebecca nodded, sliding a printed sheet across the table. This is a transaction log from last quarter. The client codenamed Asclepius paid $8 million for a direct portal into Mayfield Logistics shipping manifests. Mayfield handles 70% of military equipment transport for the Eastern Seaboard. Winter's face hardened. This isn't just securities fraud anymore. This is a national security breach. That's why I came forward, Rebecca said simply. I couldn't be complicit in this. Not once I understood the full scope. When did you first suspect? Asked a younger prosecutor. His tie already loosened at 10 in the morning. Rebecca took a breath. This was the question she had been preparing for. The one that could determine whether she was seen as a whistleblower or an accessory. 8 months ago, I noticed anomalies in our quarterly reports. The revenue projections were outpacing our client acquisition rate by a significant margin. When I asked Mason about it, he told me we had implemented a new premium tier service for select clients. It seemed plausible at the time. She paused, remembering the moment in their living room, how easily the lie had slipped from his lips, how easily she had accepted it. Then 3 months ago, I was searching for some old tax documents on our home server when I found a mislabeled folder. It was password protected, but the password was my birthday. She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Inside were partial records of Project Chimera. Not enough to understand the full scope, but enough to raise serious questions. And you confronted him, Winters asked. I tried. He dismissed my concerns, told me it was part of a classified government contract, that I didn't have the clearance to know more. I pretended to accept that explanation while I dug deeper. One of the prosecutors shuffled through his notes. Yet you remained on the board during this time. You signed off on quarterly statements. Ben Carter sat forward, his posture changing from observer to defender in an instant. My client specifically appended a note to her signatures requesting additional verification of certain revenue streams. It's all documented. Rebecca placed a hand on Ben's arm. It's a fair question. She looked directly at the prosecutor. I needed more evidence. I needed to understand exactly what they were doing before I could stop it. If I had raised too many alarms too early, they would have simply buried the evidence deeper, and we wouldn't be sitting here now. Patricia Winters studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Continue. For the next 2 hours, Rebecca walked them through her methodical investigation, how she had pieced together the fragments, following the digital breadcrumbs that Mason and Olivia had left, how she had discovered the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the encrypted communications with entities that had no legitimate business with a U.S. cybersecurity firm. The final piece came last week, she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion seeping into her bones. I found evidence that Mason was planning to sell a comprehensive access package to a client based in Moldova. This wasn't just corporate espionage anymore. This was a direct threat to national infrastructure. I knew I had to act. Winters leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Why the gala? Why not come directly to us? Rebecca met her gaze unflinchingly. Because I needed witnesses. I needed it to be public, undeniable. If I had come to you privately, Mason would have had time to destroy evidence, to spin a counter-narrative. He would have painted me as a bitter, unstable wife. And given his connections, his charm, his political donations, there was a real risk he might have succeeded. The room fell silent. The prosecutors exchanged glances. They all knew she was right. In the world of high finance and political influence, men like Mason Hamilton had an uncanny ability to slither out of accountability. Well, Winters said finally, gathering her papers, I think we have what we need for now. Mrs. Hamilton, you will need to remain available for further questioning. This investigation is going to be extensive. Of course, Rebecca said, I'll provide whatever you need. As the prosecutors filed out, Patricia Winters lingered. When they were alone save for Ben, she turned back to Rebecca. Off the record, she said, her official demeanor softening slightly. What you did took extraordinary courage. The public spectacle might have been unorthodox, but it was effective. We've already received calls from 3 other tech companies volunteering to open their books to prove they're not engaged in similar practices. You've sent shockwaves through the entire industry. Rebecca nodded, too tired for pride or satisfaction. I just did what was necessary. Winters gathered the last of her documents. Get some rest, Mitt Hamilton. The storm is just beginning. After she left, Ben turned to Rebecca. She's right, this is going to get worse before it gets better. The media frenzy, the legal battles, the depositions, it's going to be a marathon. Rebecca looked down at her hands, still elegant in their manicure but somehow foreign to her now. The diamond wedding ring she had worn for 20 years glinted in the fluorescent light. With a decisive motion, she twisted it off and placed it on the conference table with a soft clink. Then I should probably change my shoes, she said with the ghost of a smile. I've never been much of a sprinter anyway. Tyler Hamilton sat alone in the headmaster's office of Westbrook Academy. His normally confident posture collapsed in on itself. At 16, he was already showing signs of his father's height and his mother's sharp intelligence. Now he was showing something else entirely, a bewildered pain that made him look much younger than his years. The headmaster, Dr. Evelyn Clark, watched him with concern. Your mother is on her way, Tyler. She should be here within the hour. Tyler nodded mechanically. He hadn't spoken much since they'd called him to the office that morning, since they'd shown him the news. His phone had been confiscated for his own protection. They said as it had been blowing up with messages from classmates, from reporters trying to reach him through social media, from strangers offering sympathy or hurling accusations. His world had imploded overnight. His father, the titan he had idolized, was being called a traitor, a fraud. His mother had been the one to expose him. The family name, which had once opened doors and commanded respect, was now toxic. Is there anyone else you'd like us to call? Dr. Clark asked gently. Your grandparents. Perhaps, Tyler shook his head. His paternal grandparents were in Europe, probably still blissfully unaware of their son's disgrace. His maternal grandmother had passed years ago. There was no extended family to rally around him. There was just his mother, the woman who had detonated the bomb. A soft knock at the door made him look up. Clark crossed to answer it, exchanged a few quiet words with someone outside, and then stepped back. Rebecca Hamilton entered the room. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman who had always attended his school functions in designer clothes and flawless makeup. This Rebecca was dressed in simple slacks and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Her face was bare of makeup, revealing the dark circles under her eyes. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Yet there was a quiet strength in her bearing that he had never noticed before. Tyler, she said softly. Just his name, nothing more. He stared at her, a tumult of emotions crossing his face of anger, confusion, grief. Why, he finally asked, his voice cracking. Why did you do it like that? Why didn't you warn me? Dr. Clark discreetly slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her. Rebecca moved forward slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. She sat in the chair next to him, not touching him, respecting the invisible barrier of his anger. I couldn't warn you, Tyler. I couldn't warn anyone. If word had gotten back to your father, he would have destroyed the evidence. People would have been hurt, more people than already have been. But it's Dad, Tyler said, his voice rising in distress. You destroyed him in front of everyone. Do you know what they're saying online? Do you know what they're saying about us? Rebecca's face contorted with pain. I know, and I'm so sorry you have to go through this. But Tyler, what your father was doing, he said you're crazy. Tyler cut in, the words spilling out now. He called me this morning. He said you've always been jealous of his success, that you've been trying to undermine him for years. He said you made everything up. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. Of course Mason had reached out to their son, Of course, he was already spinning his narrative. "What do you believe, Tyler?" she asked quietly. He looked away, tears welling in his eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Everything's falling apart." Rebecca took a deep breath. "I need to show you something. Ben, my lawyer, didn't want me to, but I think you deserve to know the truth." She pulled a tablet from her bag and set it on the desk between them. "This is a secure device. What I'm about to show you is evidence that will be used in the federal case against your father." Tyler stared at the tablet with apprehension. "You don't have to look," Rebecca said. "But if you want to understand why I did what I did, it's all here." Slowly, almost reluctantly, Tyler reached for the tablet. Rebecca entered a passcode and stepped back, giving him space. For the next 20 minutes, she watched in silence as her son scrolled through document after document, financial records, encrypted communications, security vulnerabilities deliberately coded into the Hamilton Innovations flagship products. The evidence was irrefutable, laid out in clinical detail. Mason's own words, in emails and memos, damned him completely. Tyler's face paled as he read. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different, harder, older. "The Cayman account," he said, his voice flat. "The password is my birthday." Rebecca nodded, the pain of this particular betrayal still fresh. "Yes. He used my birthday as the password for his secret account where he kept money from selling out his own clients." Tyler's voice was incredulous, rising with a new anger. "Who does that?" "Someone who never thought he would be caught," Rebecca said quietly. "Someone who believed his own lies so completely that he couldn't imagine a world where he wasn't in control." Tyler set the tablet down carefully, as if it might explode. He was silent for a long time, processing. Rebecca waited, knowing that whatever came next would define their relationship for years to come. "What happens now?" he finally asked, his voice small but steadier. "Now we rebuild," Rebecca said simply. "It won't be easy. The name Hamilton is going to be a burden for a while. We'll lose the houses, the money, the status. People will talk, but we'll survive. Tyler, we'll start over. Will Dad go to prison?" The question hung in the air, stark and unavoidable. Rebecca didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes, I believe he will. The evidence is overwhelming. And there are national security implications that make this more serious than just financial fraud." Tyler nodded slowly, processing this new reality. "He lied to me. All those times he took me to the office, showed me around, told me I would run it someday. It was all based on a lie. Your father loves you, Tyler," Rebecca said, the words difficult but necessary. "That part isn't a lie. He lost his way. He started believing that the rules didn't apply to him, that his brilliance entitled him to more." "Like Lady Macbeth," Tyler said unexpectedly. "We're studying it in English. Ambition that consumes everything." Rebecca almost smiled at the literary reference. Her son, finding meaning in chaos through books, just as she always had. "Something like that, yes." Tyler looked at her directly then, his young face serious. "Are you going to be okay financially? I mean," the question surprised her. In the midst of his own turmoil, he was worried about her. "We'll be fine. I made sure of that. I have my own accounts that aren't tied to the company. We won't be billionaires anymore, but we won't be destitute." "And what about you? What will you do now?" Rebecca hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. The last 24 hours had been about survival, about justice. The future was a luxury she hadn't yet indulged in. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But whatever it is, I'll do it honestly. That's the promise I'm making to you. Tyler, no more lies, no more facades." He was quiet again, thinking. Finally, he stood up, his tall frame unfolding from the chair. Rebecca rose as well, uncertain, afraid to hope. Without a word, Tyler stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. It was an awkward embrace. the hug of a teenage boy who was trying to be a man, but it was real. Rebecca held him tightly, feeling the tears she had suppressed for so long finally break free. "I'm sorry, Miss," she whispered against his shoulder. "I'm so sorry it had to be this way." "I know," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "I know, Mom." They stood like that for a long moment, mother and son, survivors in the wreckage of a life that had been built on deception. When they finally broke apart, something had shifted between them. The worst was still ahead: the trials, the media scrutiny, the adjustment to a new reality, but they would face it together. Dr. Clark knocked softly before re-entering. "Tyler's things are packed," she said gently, "and we've arranged for a private exit to avoid any unwanted attention." Rebecca nodded gratefully. "Thank you for your discretion." "Westbrook stands by its students, Miss Hamilton," the headmaster said firmly. "Tyler's place here is secure, regardless of circumstances." The implication was clear despite the scandal. Despite the inevitable financial changes, Tyler's scholarship would be honored. It was a small mercy in a merciless situation. As they walked through the quiet back hallways of the school, Tyler asked, "Where are we going?" "A friend's house in Connecticut," Rebecca replied. "Ben arranged it. It's private, secure. We can regroup there, figure out our next steps." Tyler nodded, adjusting the backpack on his shoulder. "Will we ever go back to the apartment? I mean," Rebecca thought of the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the place that had never quite felt like home despite its opulence. "I don't think so. Tyler, that life is over." As they approached the service exit, Rebecca saw a sleek black car waiting, Ben Carter standing beside it. The morning sun glinted off its polished surface, a new day rising over a landscape forever altered by the truth. "Ready?" she asked her son. Tyler took a deep breath and squared his shoulders, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made Rebecca's heart clench. But when he spoke, the words were all his own. "Yeah," he said, "let's build something real this time." The media frenzy reached a fever pitch within days. The Hamilton scandal had everything: wealth, betrayal, corporate espionage, and a healthy dose of public humiliation. Talk shows dissected Rebecca's motives. Financial analysts calculated the collateral damage to the tech sector, and internet sleuths combed through every available photo of the couple, looking for signs of the fracture that had led to such a spectacular implosion. Rebecca watched none of it. In the sanctuary of the Connecticut estate, a sprawling, secluded property owned by one of Ben's clients, who was abroad, she and Tyler established a new routine. Mornings were for dealing with the endless parade of legal documents that required her attention. Afternoons were for Tyler's remote schoolwork, arranged by Dr. Clark to minimize disruption to his education. Evenings were for healing, for quiet conversations on the veranda overlooking the pristine grounds, for beginning to rebuild their relationship without Mason's overshadowing presence. It was during one such evening, 12 days after the gala, that Ben Carter arrived with news that would alter their trajectory once again. "Sorry to interrupt your piece," he said, settling into a wicker chair on the veranda, accepting the glass of iced tea Rebecca offered. "But there's a development you need to know about." Rebecca tensed. "Mason?" "No, he's still maintaining his innocence, still out on bail. His legal team is formidable, but they're fighting a losing battle. The evidence is too strong." Ben set his briefcase on the table and extracted a sleek folder. "This is something else entirely." He handed the folder to Rebecca. The logo on its cover was unfamiliar to her, a stylized shield with the words Sentinel Group embossed in silver. "What is this?" she asked, opening it to find a formal letter addressed to her. "An opportunity," Ben said simply. "The Sentinel Group is a new consortium formed by several of your former clients, Sterling Cooper Capital, Vidian, Mayfield Logistics, and a few others. They've been left vulnerable by Hamilton Innovation's collapse. The security infrastructure they relied on is compromised. They need a solution. Fast." Rebecca skimmed the letter, her eyes widening as she grasped what was being proposed. "They want me to build a new security platform." "They want you to build a new company," Ben corrected, They're offering startup capital, infrastructure support, and client commitments. They want you, Rebecca the architect, not the wife, to create something that actually delivers on the promise of unbreachable security. She stared at him, then back at the letter. The figures being discussed were substantial, not Hamilton Innovation substantial, but significant enough to represent a genuine second chance. Why would they trust me, she asked, bewildered. After everything that's happened, why would anyone in the industry want to be associated with the Hamilton name? Ben smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. They don't want the Hamilton name. They want yours, your maiden name. Rebecca blinked, taken aback. It had been so long since she had thought of herself as Rebecca Mitchell, the brilliant coder from MIT who had once dreamed of changing the world through technology. They're calling it Mitchell Systems. Ben continued. They want you as CTO, with full autonomy over the security architecture. No compromises, no backdoors, no secret agendas, just what you always intended to build in the first place. The proposition was dizzying. A chance to reclaim her original vision, to step out of Mason's shadow, not just personally but professionally, to build something that truly reflected her values, her expertise. I don't know, Ben, she said, her voice uncertain. The timing, it feels opportunistic. Using the scandal to launch a competitor. It's business. Ben acknowledged, these companies need what you can provide, but it's also a vindication. They've seen the evidence. Rebecca, they know you were the brains behind the original code. They're betting on you, not despite what happened, but because of it, because you chose integrity over comfort, truth over power. She closed the folder, needing time to process. I'll think about it. Don't think too long, Ben advised. The tech world abhors a vacuum. Someone will fill the space Hamilton Innovations left behind. It might as well be you. After Ben left, Rebecca sat alone on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Mitchell Systems, her name, her vision, her terms. It was tempting a path forward that would transform her from victim to founder, from the woman who brought down a corrupt empire to the woman who built a better one in its place. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Tyler approach until he spoke. You should do it, he said, sliding into the chair beside her. She looked up, startled. Sorry, I overheard. The walls in this place echo. Tyler, it's complicated. The timing, the perception. It's not complicated, he interrupted, with the clarity of youth. They need what you can build. You need a purpose. It fits. He gestured to the folder. Besides, Mitchell Systems sounds way cooler than Hamilton Innovations. Despite everything, Rebecca laughed. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine. You think so? Definitely was like a fresh start for both of us. His expression grew more serious. You always said that when I was young. You stepped back from your career to give Dad space to build his. Maybe now it's your turn. Rebecca looked at her son with new eyes. When had he grown so wise, so perceptive in the crucible of the last 2 weeks? Something in Tyler had been tempered, refined. The entitled boy of privilege was giving way to a young man of substance. I'm scared, she admitted, the words difficult to say aloud. What if I fail? What if I can't deliver what they're expecting? Tyler's response was immediate and confident. You won't fail. You're the architect. Remember, that's what you called yourself on stage. The architect. You know how to build things that last. The architect. The title she had claimed in her moment of greatest vulnerability and strength. Not the wife, not the victim, but the creator, the builder. Rebecca reached for her phone, making a decision. I'll call Ben in the morning. Tell him I want to meet with the Sentinel group. Tyler smiled, a genuine expression that reminded her of his younger self, before the weight of the scandal had pressed down on him. Good, I think it's time we both built something new. As darkness fell over the Connecticut estate, Rebecca found herself mentally sketching the foundations of a new security protocol, one built on transparency and genuine protection. For the first time since the gala, she felt the stirrings of something that felt dangerously like hope. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a warning bell sounded. Mason was still out there, wounded but dangerous. The battle for justice had been won, but the war was far from over. And in the shadows of the digital world they both inhabited, new threats were already taking shape. Drawn to the chaos created by Hamilton Innovation's fall, the next phase of Rebecca's journey was just beginning, and it would test every ounce of her newfound strength.